there was a tiger corridor population, and when they found them in Bhutan, even living up as high as the Himalayas, they helped link those populations together. So that has been a real success story. And also working with WWF, who work to protect the tigers, there is hope for them. And as I said, if we don't continue to protect tigers with like breeding populations in captivity and working with people to stop the poaching and the wildlife conflict, then the tiger will probably be extinct in the next 50 years. But if we carry on to trying to protect them, we could save them from extinction. The next animal is another of our closest relatives, and is also the largest tree-dwelling animal on the planet. It is the old man of the forest, the orangutan. Orangutans are found in the forests and jungles of Borneo and Sumatra. As you can see, because this one here is a male, I can tell he's a male because the face on the male is very broad and flattened. It's almost like he's run headfirst into a bus. But apparently the females find that very attractive. And they are the largest tree-dwelling animal on the planet, and while a fully grown male orangutan would be no bigger than me, he would be a lot heavier and probably a lot stronger. And they're not carnivores like chimps, they are purely herbivores like gorillas, meaning they feed on leaves and fruit. In fact, in the 1950s or 60s, a young David Attenborough went to Borneo to film orangutans, and that was really revolutionary for the time because very little was known about them then. But unfortunately, every species of orangutan that's found in Borneo and Sumatra and other parts of Southeast Asia are in trouble because the old man of the forest is now classed as endangered. And there are many reasons for that. I mean, first is the illegal wildlife trade, because quite often young orangutans are stolen from the wild to be sold as exotic pets to disreputable zoos, to circuses, a rich man's collection, or for people to have their photos taken with. But the biggest threat to the orangutans' survival is habitat loss, because we are cutting and burning down the forests they rely on to make way for plantations. Many of those plantations are palm oil, and palm oil is probably the most heavily used item in everyday products today. In fact, if you go down to the supermarket today, then almost everything there will have palm oil in it. But there are people working to protect them, like with preserving the habitats they live in and building breeding populations in captivity, but also buying eco-friendly palm oil products, like products that have palm oil in them that has been used, grown at an eco-friendly plantation, is a good way to help protect their habitat. So if we carry on then hopefully we could save the old man of the forest from becoming nothing more than a legend. Now, the next I'm going to show you are the anti-poaching squads and the poachers. I'm going to start with poachers. Now, what you've got to understand is a lot of poachers are in like Africa and Asia, but mainly in Africa. Poachers are people that hunt and kill animals illegally for the illegal wildlife trade. And what you've got to understand though is a lot of them are just very, very desperate people who come from communities riddled with poverty and disease and crime, and they just really want to feed their families. And I can understand why people do get desperate, and when you have nothing and you see this opportunity to make a vast amount of money, you take it. But I've been working with wild animals for a long time now, and it takes a lot to shock me and make me sick to my stomach. But just what people can do to animals for money is just heartbreaking. But the anti-poaching squads, like in Africa, to me, are the true wildlife heroes in Africa. Because they are people who put their lives on the line to protect the wildlife. Like elephants, rhinos, pangolins, gorillas, chimps, and tigers, orangutans. And this can be a very dangerous job, as poachers are heavily armed, they're well organised, and quite often they kill rangers or squads of anti-poachers as soon as they see them. So it is a very dangerous job, but if poachers are caught, then they are usually sentenced to about 50 years in jail, and they tend not to last very long in jail because poachers are heavily hated in Africa, and a lot of them don't last long in prison because they give their country a very filthy reputation. Of course, these guys here are the true heroes of wildlife conservation, or when it comes to poachers. Now, what I'm going to show you now are animals that went extinct in the past because of humans. The first one is the dodo. Now, the dodo was a large flightless bird that lived on the island of Mauritius in the Indian Ocean, where it was endemic, meaning it was found there and nowhere else on Earth. And it's almost certainly the first animal species that human beings actually exterminated in historic times. And of course it was around about the late 1500s, right into the 1600s, that the dodo was discovered, when Dutch sailors arrived on the island of Mauritius and they found the dodo. And dodos were originally hunted for food, but it was said that the dodo actually tasted quite disgusting. Of course, a lot of their habitat, the forests they lived in, were cut down by the Dutch sailors. Also, the sailors brought with them cats, dogs, rats, foxes, badgers and weasels, and the dodo was a ground nesting bird, and they've also been portrayed as stupid, when actually that is untrue and very unfair, because the dodo wasn't actually stupid, it was more trusting, because it had never seen human beings before, and it had no natural predators. And of course, the rats that were brought along plundered the dodo nests and ate their eggs, and of course the dodo adults were then eaten by foxes, badgers, weasels, cats and dogs, and in less than 100 years after their discovery, the dodo just completely disappeared. And it marks a new low in our relationship with the natural world. And in fact, the dodo is quite often portrayed as a short, squat and dumpy bird, but recent research has shown that they actually would have stood more upright than portrayed in a painting by an 18th century Dutch artist who had never seen a dodo before and based his painting on accounts from seafarers. But also, we believe its feathers were probably a lot fluffier than in the painting, and we now know that the dodo was related to the pigeon, so it probably gave a pigeon-like call, like a sort of goo-goo, 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 which gave the bird its name. And now the next two animals that went extinct in the past because of us are the mammoth and the mastodons. Now, the mammoth and the mastodon were relatives of the elephants, and they had probably the same social and family structure in history, but of course the mastodons lived in North and Central America and the northern part of South America, but the mammoths were found in not only North America but across Europe and Asia, and they lived on the planet about 2 million years ago. But, I mean, no one's entirely sure how they went extinct. I mean, one argument says that it was climate change around 12,000 years ago at the end of the Ice Age when the freezing plains they lived on melted away and the ice went back up north and they couldn't cope with the warming climate. Another argument is that they were overhunted by early humans who hunted them for their bones, their fur, their tusks, and their meat. I mean, we may never really know if it was a single thing, but I always say it might have been a combination of both climate change and overhunting by early humans, because the most horrifying bit is we didn't know any better, but we're still doing this kind of thing to rare animals today. This one is probably the creature that's fascinated me more than any other extinct animal. It is the elephant bird. Now, the elephant bird was the largest bird that has ever lived. And when I say largest, I mean it stood well over 3 meters tall, it weighed probably 1/4 of a ton, and it laid the largest eggs that have ever been discovered. But it wasn't a predator, it was a herbivore, which meant it probably fed on plants and leaves. And it lived on the island of Madagascar, where it was endemic, meaning it was found there and nowhere else on Earth. I first came across the elephant bird when I was about 9 years old in primary school, and then when I watched a David Attenborough documentary about the elephant bird, and it fueled my fascination with this bird. I mean, no one's entirely sure how they went extinct. I mean, Attenborough in his programme, the Attenborough and the Giant Egg, he said it might have been climate change, where much of its swampy habitat turned into desert. It could have been deforestation when human settlers arrived on the island and cut down much of the forests they browsed in to make way for farms. Or it could have been hunted, but a modern day ostrich, as we all know, has a kick that's powerful enough to potentially open a man's stomach. So I'm pretty sure a kick from a fully grown elephant bird would have killed a human being outright. So I'm not sure they would have hunted a fully grown elephant bird, but they might have hunted a juvenile, or it could have been the poaching of their giant eggs, which probably were a great source of nourishment, or it could have been when chickens were brought to the island of Madagascar, they brought with them diseases that the elephant birds weren't immune to. Or it could have been a combination of all 5 of those things, but whatever it was, by the 17th century, the elephant bird completely disappeared from Madagascar. And now the next one is actually 2 creatures from the island of New Zealand. It is the moas and the haast's eagle. Now, the moas were the tallest birds on the planet that were found in New Zealand. They may not have been as big and heavy as the elephant bird, but they stood to about 3 meters high. And the Maoris of New Zealand had legends of those giant birds that have once roamed their islands, but Europeans dismissed them as myths. But in 1839, Professor Richard Owen, who was the curator of the Natural History Museum in London, who also had a particular flair for interpreting fossils, got enough bones to put together one of those giant birds, and he proved that this was no myth. And of course, there were several different species of moas, but the one in the museum was the tallest. The moa was a herbivore, so it fed on plants, and you may think that such a giant bird had no predators in the forests of New Zealand, but you'd be wrong. The Maoris